YouTube. Hi YouTube. Welcome to the Mushoku Tensei read along. Today we're going to go ahead and be reading some of the Paul snippets brought to us by the wonderful Zictor. Honestly, dude, the Mushoku Tensei community has always shown up strong to the streams. And I just wanted to go ahead and give out a special shout out to all of them. Eidolon, Zictor, Masha Tank, Nickmere, Kaufme, everyone in the Mushoku Tensei community, because time after time they've been pressing for this wonderful content and for us to be able to go ahead and read it and do this stuff on screen. Guys, I will also say, if you guys are interested in joining like any Mushoku Tensei communities out there in Reddit, try joining Six Faced World. That's where you'll find a lot of these wonderful individuals, you know. I hope I said it right. I hope that was a good plug. Haven't been there myself, but I know a lot of my mods and a lot of the people in the community are in there because they find the community overwhelming and positive. And I just want to go ahead and give out that shout out. Thank you guys so much for being amazing to who you are. And thanks so much for joining us today. Guys, we will be stopping, we will be analyzing, we will be talking a lot about it. I'm gonna go into a stopping point, into a natural stopping point. I am drinking, heads up, so if you hear me slur, you're like, ugh, you know, therapist slurred. Tequila, man, it'll do that to you. But I also do want to state, hey, aside from the ones that we read on YouTube and on stream, I haven't really touched, or I haven't even read anything else to do with Mushoku Tensei. So anything that comes as like a prediction or a wild thing out there or controversial points, know that it's from like a psychological point of view. And no, I have not read any like the light novel. Actually, we're thinking about reading the light novel here on stream, like starting from chapter 1. Once we find out the actual start date of the season 2. But with that being said, hey, why don't we go just jump into it? I'm gonna go ahead and bring this up full screen here. All right. Volume 1. This is Paul's POV excerpts. After slapping Rudeus, my son was angry. The boy had never been one to display such overt emotion, but there he was, silently fuming. How did it come to this? It started that afternoon when Mrs. Edo came by our house furious. She brought along her son, Somal. Somal? Considered one of the neighborhood brats. There was a blue bruise around one of his eyes. As a swordsman who'd seen my fair share of battle, I knew right away he'd taken a punch. His mother's story was a long and rambling, but the gist was that my boy had punched hers. When I heard that, I was inwardly relieved. Ordinarily, I might have assumed that my son had been playing outside, caught sight of Somo and his buddies playing, and tried to join them. But my boy wasn't like the other kids. He was already a water saint magician at his age. He'd probably said something high and mighty. The other kids had fired back, and then they'd all gotten in a fight. My boy was pretty clever and mature for his age, but he was still a kid after all. Mrs. Edo continued to get red in the face and then went pale as she tried to make this out to be a major bust-up, when it was just a quarrel among children in the end. And just by looking, you could tell that her son's injury wasn't even going to leave a mark. I'd scold my boy, and that would be the end of it. Children were bound to get into scuffles, and that turned into blows at some point. But Rudeus was far more powerful than other children. Not only had he been the disciple of the young water saint, Roxy, I'd been training him since he was 3. Any fight he got into was sure to be one-sided. Things that had gone okay this time, but if he ever got too hot-headed, he might wind up overdoing it. A smart kid like Rudeus ought to be able to deal with someone like Solma without throwing a punch. I needed to teach him that punching someone was a rash thing to do, and he needed to give it more thought before resorting to it. Hold on. Oh, I think that these might be words that come back to you, my friend. No, but it's absolutely right, dude. Kids, when it comes to the rules of play and rules of like justices and, you know, what is moral and immoral and all of these things, right, for a kid's perspective, oftentimes you have Paul is such a Paul. He knows the theory but has trouble putting it into practice, and so do a lot of parents, realistically, which is why I'm saying, like, for example, Rudy going through and, you know, out of a perspective like this, a parent being like, oh, I might have to scold him, I might have to do whatever. Natural parenting, right? Which is like, you don't want your kid going ahead and getting used to a scenario like this. My big aspect in all of this, though, is, and I think this is always why whenever we're watching the show, and even when I'm reading this, what narrative is it being given? What are the power dynamics at present here? from what I understood, Paul, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, please. This is the way that I get educated on the characters and I learn, and my I'm able to sharpen a lot more of my predictions to be on point and hitting it. From my whole thing is like Paul is sort of the protector of this land, right? Like Paul is the knight, like probably assigned to this area or something, right? So my thing is, and this is what I find interesting, is the cojones in Mrs. Errol to be able to go up and like just like yell and like be like, your son punched my son, you know, your son beat up my son, you know, he took our jobs, you know, like that, like South Park moment where like all of them are yelling. He was hired by Philip to protect this area against monsters, right? So it puts him in a position of power, and that's sort of what I'm kind of curious about, right? Because clearly Rudy is no ordinary kid, if we can all be realistic. He still is a kid, but he's no, like, compared to the other kids around his age, he is like far like beyond statistical significance. Like he's far above like the bell curve, if we're gonna go and load it this way. It's interesting because for me, right, and I have a lot of kids that are really specially gifted that I do therapy with, right? And in situations like this, because I've encountered situations like this whenever I'm doing like play therapy and stuff like this, where because they're advanced, they get in fights over certain more like morality judgments, over friendships, over aspects like this. And instead of physical punishment, how do I put it? Mental stimulation, or mental, like being able to go ahead and bring up retorts and actually drive them through a point of like cognitive, like, you know, the cognitive barriers, i.e. Why'd you do it? Oh, because I had to protect my friend. Why? Because of this. Literally just keep asking why to someone until you come down to a main point. This is what cognitive behavioral therapy does whenever you're like, I'm not good enough, I'm a loser, this, right? We keep asking why until we get into the core schema as to what makes you you, right? Once we find out what that is, it's like, okay, but if you feel this way, then why do you act a certain way? We start doing comparatives in order for like a person to start understanding, wait a minute, I don't necessarily have to go into a fight mode immediately when I can resolve it by doing other aspects instead. But if I was in Rudy's position, hey, I would have probably done the same thing. I'm not gonna fucking lie to you guys. I'm not gonna go in this high like moral horse judgment. I'm just saying, like, as a therapist looking in, it's like, what, like, you know, what aspects or what ways could we interact, or could we go about without necessarily leading to that rash thing, like Paul is saying, of like, you know, throwing a punch. There are 50 saint level magicians in any given schools, although there should be more than a couple thousand, if that many. Oof. All right, let's go ahead and continue, because for me, like, this is telling me that, like, in terms of power dynamics, there seems to be, they might respect Paul enough to go out and tell him what may be happening, but Mrs. Edel's still, for some reason, it's like, oh, my kid gets hurt, I'm gonna go ahead and be a Karen. In my opinion, can reach without being recognized as such. All right, let me read chat real quick and we'll get... So I actually been thinking about high IQ person interaction with people at the beginning of the stream. Point to Kong Ming. Do you think people like Kong Ming serves as a lord because they are isolated and look for someone to appreciate them? Every world has a Karen. True, Cloud Monkey. It depends, right? It depends as to how you are. Because, for example... If and I guess we can relate this, right? We know that Rudy has gone through sexual trauma as Eartheus. Eartheus went through a severe sexual trauma and severe traumatic moments where he got, right, and that's my estimation roughly to come out of it, where he got like a lot of ruptures in his relationships, ruptures in his attachment styles, trauma. I would actually label Rudy with PTSD, PTSD-C to be in fact, which is post-traumatic stress disorder complex, right? It is a part of the DSM-5, yeah. And well, the reason why I would actually give Rudeus with PTSD is, number one, the trauma that he experienced at school, right, when being tied up and being made fun of. That's sexual abuse, man. That's sexual trauma. You know, that's just straight up, yeah. Anybody taking pictures, pointing and laughing, there's shame that comes into it. the relationships that are torn with his family, you know, resorting to deviance as an action for it, being locked in, social isolational aspects. We can go on, so on, so forth, right? So a big diagnosis that would probably be thrown out there would be like PTSD with either moments of like extreme isolation due to depression or anxiety, right? Complex means that there's more than one diagnosis at play here. So PTSD might be the umbrella, the big thing that someone would be able to look at. And we'd be able to look at anxiety, depression, probably like social anxiety as well, motor developmental skills or developmental skills in general not being met as well, right? So when we compile all of this, right, and like say that he's a high IQ person and you have isolation at bound here, do you think that being given another chance at like redoing everything, you wouldn't try and like form bonds with everyone? That's not, that was past me. That's no longer me. This is why people give themselves some new titles and aspects. Oh, for example, I am, you know, Netherlands Ed, and I come, you know, because that's the aspect of me that I want to be, you know, that's where I was the best, instead of accepting the reality that I was, right? If Eartheus kept claiming himself as, or like Rudeus kept claiming himself as Eartheus, which he does have some identity issues, which you can tell when he meets the man god, he still presents himself as Eartheus instead of Rudeus. But you see what I'm getting at is there's identity issues at play here. If I am like the new Ed, right? If I'm new Ed instead of Evo Ed, I would try and make sure that I form attachments with all of you, because all of a sudden, guess what? My anxious attachment of like not being liked, of going through that trauma, my anxiety is skyrocketing. I don't want to be isolated again. I don't want to go through that again. But if I make connections, it can hurt me in the long run. I might have to go through it. Is it a risk that I'm willing to take? I don't think he was in the 95th percentile. No, probably not. But he was at least able to go ahead and, like, you know, when he was reborn, to maintain a higher level of intelligence culturally than everyone else around, right? So, for example, if we were to compare, like, not even Eartheus, like, Eartheus, I would assume, was a little above average. But Rudeus, in his time period, he was probably, like, way up there. Yeah, EIQ is overrated. I tend to go more for emotional intelligence, like, how are you at like emotionally being able to go ahead and meet your needs and being able to relate with others and being able to, like, for example, are you able to go ahead and be empathetic towards others when you walk into a room, which is something that I find that Rudeus was learning more so when he was reborn as Rudeus, right, instead of Eartheus. He was praised as a computer savant. Oh shit, no way. Paul and Zenith are very intelligent. All right, let's continue, guys. That was actually a really good discussion. Good stuff, guys. Children were bound to get into scuffles that turned into blows at some point. Yeah, they do. But Rudeus was far more powerful than other children. Not only had he been the disciple of the young water saint, Roxy, I'd been training him since he was 3, and any fight he got into was sure to be one-sided. True. I hate to be this way. Hold on. I hate to stop right here. But I just want to say, hey, you guys have really gotten me into Roxy. I'm not going to elaborate. I'm just going to say I've been turned into the Church of Roxy, where, like, yeah, anyway, things got okay this time. But if he ever got too hot-headed, he might wind up overdoing it. A smart kid like Rudeus ought to be able to deal with someone like Somo without throwing a punch. I need to teach him that punching someone was a rash thing to do, and he needed to give it more thought before resorting to it. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's totally acceptable. I need to give him a harsh scolding. That had been the plan anyway. How did it go so wrong? My son had no intention of apologizing to me whatsoever. Rather, he looked at me like one might look at an insect. I'm sure that from my son's perspective, they were having a fight on equal footing, but when someone has powers like his, they need to be aware of just how strong they are. Besides, he hurt someone. I need to apologize to him. I need to apologize. He was a smart kid. He might not understand now, but I was sure he'd arrive to the right answer in due time. Don't question the prayers of the members of the church. I feel like Ed was always a rock. Eris is great. Don't get me wrong. Eris is muy bonita. Eris is preciosa. Muy buena niña. Eris is wonderful. But if we're talking about them, like, you know, there's a reason why Orsted is best girl. There's a reason why Roxy's panties are, you know, highlighted in the show, you know. But no, okay, real quick. Let's get into this, because this is actually interesting. What I find interesting about all of this, and this is, I guess this is how you can tell that Paul might have had some emotional stunts, right, in his development. Like, and this happens to all parents, by the way, and this is not me faulting Paul in any way, shape, or form, because the more that I've done like group therapy with kids, the more that I find a lot of parents project their insecurities onto their kids, and they take stuff way too personally. So I've seen aspects like this. I've even encountered this like with my father as well. My father is a martial artist. He started up the martial arts scene sort of where I live, right? It's been a generational, cross-generational thing where my great-great-grandfather taught my grandfather martial arts, and it just kept going down the line, right? Nonetheless, there was a time when Fighter Ed, I guess, little kid Fighter Ed, would go around trying to defend all the cute girls in his class from being bullied in elementary and middle school, right? It's Chinbyo Ed, I guess, cringy Ed, right? Where they would try and throw like dirt and stuff at them, and I'd just go like, honestly, I'd beat them up. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, right? Because they were really, really rude. And I remember my dad one time, like, I came home and he's like, put on these gloves. And I was like, what are you talking about? Because like every day after school, I would come home and I would go through 3 hours worth of a class of fighting. And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, if you can beat them up, then you can beat me up. And I'm like, that's not how that works. And he's like, well, you're gonna have to go ahead and like learn. No, you're not even telling me, hey, I'm sorry that school called or whatever. And it's like, wait a second. And I didn't even put it on, dude. What I asked him was, is this a concept of shame that came to you? Like, I was like, are you ashamed that the school called you because I was trying to defend some of my friends from being bullied? And he got pissed. He exploded. Oh, now it's about me, and like all of these concepts of me. Oh yeah, you're looking at me like you don't think I'm smart enough. All the insecurities started flowing out. Like, oh, just because I didn't do this at your age, and like these insecurities started being projected onto it, instead of being like, hey, you know what? There's other ways of going ahead and approaching this. Why don't you try and telling a teacher, or why don't you go and try and telling an adult or someone nearby, Like, look, I know this might not be the perfect option, but let's talk about it. What's the next time that you're going to go and do this? And escalating it from there instead of immediately going into hard discipline. Let's go. And that's a key aspect in parenting. Or and this is my own personal opinion. Y'all can flame me. Let me cook for a second. I'm seeing stuff go, and this is from my psychology perspective, from group therapy, stuff go wrong, dude. I'm gonna be straight up. Parenting, some of the parents that I've seen that go through this, they're either go way too hard to the point where CPS needs to be involved, or they're too laxed about it. And it's like, no one knows that, like, not a lot of people practicing in between, Not a lot of people go like, hey, let's go ahead and like use a little bit of the emotional intelligence that I have as a parent, that I should have as a parent, and try and walk through it. Not even teachers, because teachers even result to that, Well, never does anything true. But that's why I'm saying, like, I can't fault Paul, but I can see a lot of like how insecurities can be projected onto Rudy, and all of a sudden turning like, oh, but Rudy isn't apologizing to me, and he should be apologizing to me. Instead of like, let's go ahead and rationalize, where is this coming from? And let's see where this goes, because that's what a person nowadays should be able to do. Back then, though, totally in character. Sorry, guys. If I get flamed for this, it's a-okay, but I'm just saying, like, there's a lot of people out there who, like, I think it's an important lesson in parenting. I think from Paul's perspective, we've all encountered a lot of Pauls in terms of this. Have you ever had a parent do that, where they've projected their insecurities onto you, where they're like, don't look at me like that? Oh, just because, for example, one of my parents didn't graduate high school, all right? And that's a big insecurity for them. I love them to death. I empathize with them. I like literally can't praise them enough for being able to be there with me and like push me through university, through college, and now through my PsyD, right? They've been absolutely fantastic parents. I can't ask for anything else. But the moment that like the shoe's on the other foot, or there's like a discussion or something involved, those insecurities pop up. Oh, is it because I'm not educated? Oh, you're looking at me like this because you're using high level words because I can't understand you, That's not how it works. Yeah, Senna's pregnancy was a big surprise, caught Paul by surprise, and he decided to be a good husband and father instantly. Exactly, Zictor. And a big aspect in this is relapse happens. And I think that's the key takeaway from all of this is relapse is completely normal, and you're not going to go like change overnight, right? and it takes a while to go ahead and like start the process of change, which is why I find shit like this fascinating. I hope you guys do too. I hope when you guys are reading this, you're like, oh, wait a minute, like, oh shit. Anyway, besides he'd hurt someone, Relapse and Mushoku Tensei named a more iconic duo. True. I needed him to apologize. He was a smart kid. He might not understand now, but I was sure he'd arrive at the right conclusion in due time. With that in mind, I took a firm tone to ask what had happened, only for him to respond with condescension and sarcasm. It galled me, and in the heat of a moment, I struck him, and here I was, trying to teach him a lesson about how people with power shouldn't resort to violence against weaker people. Yeah. I'd hit him. I knew I was in the wrong, but I couldn't say that while trying to give my boy a lecture. I couldn't tell him not to do what I'd done moments earlier myself. While I struggled with my rattled composure, my son implied he'd done nothing wrong, and even said that if I had a problem with it, he'd leave home. I almost told him right there to go ahead. Go, but I managed to resist the urge. I had to. I was from a strict family myself, with an overbearing father who'd tear into me without giving me a fair shake. My resentments had grown to the point where we had a huge fight that ended with me storming out of the house. My father's blood ran in my veins, the blood of a stubborn, unyielding Commergian, and it ran in Rudeus's veins as well. Just look at how stubborn he could be. He was definitely my kid. When I was told to get out, I gave my old man some tit for tat and did exactly as he said. I might drive Rudeus off as well. He'd said he'd wait until he grew up before leaving home, but I told him to get out right now. I bet he would. I was sure it was in his nature. I heard that not long after I left, my father took ill and died. I heard he regretted our big fight until the very end, and I was glad to hear it. Curmudgeon, yeah. Dude, okay, I'm gonna be straight up with you before we continue, because I'm not reading up from this. How many of you have heard of generational trauma and generational cycles? In psychology, this is an aspect that comes down, right? Which is we adopt, even unconsciously, I will never be like my parent. And yet as we start growing up, we start adopting like some of the forms of trauma that they've experienced, and for example, parenting styles, so on and so forth, onto ourselves and onto our kids. And honestly, like when looking at something like this, it's one of those moments where you're like, for example, I'd never be like my dad, or like, you know, a kid told me this, by the way, a long time ago. He's like, I'd never be like my dad. I never beat someone up. And then like later on down the road, a couple years pass, he was beating up on an innocent kid, and like he came to therapy, and the next day, and he's like, he's like, I'm starting to become exactly like my dad. And I was like, a couple years have passed, dude. Like, what does that mean? Do you want to break the cycle? It's gonna be work. Because here's the thing, people, we adopt a lot of times, even unconsciously, the actions, the cultural expectations from others around us. If we get hit, we normalize being hit. If people yell at us, we normalize being yelled at, right? For example, some of us, and I hate to put it this way, can only sleep when there's a TV on, because we're so used to either being a part of a large family where there was a lot of people talking, or because there was domestic violence in the household and the TV was the only form of white noise that can go ahead and drown that out. Some of us, right, go through relationships, and we get in, and after the honeymoon phase we break off because we're scared of getting too attached. Because what happens if dad walks out on, like, you know, if they walk out on me the way my dad walked out on my mom, type of thing. If people go to the other extreme, it can be, Victor, and that's exactly it, Victor. So like, for example, you can follow the same repetitive cycle, or you can go through an extremity where all of a sudden, imagine Paul being an overprotective, like, helicopter parent, where they won't even allow Rudy to get dirty. That's still a part of trauma. That's still a part of that generational trauma that's coming along, but it's now just projected onto this extreme thing of being overprotective. You know, so you can get one of those things where you mimic what's been happening, right? Or you become an overprotective individual, or to the other extremity, essentially, right? And so the goal would be to try and go ahead and, like, first off, acknowledge what that is, like the moment that you're repeating cycles and starting to break it. And I'm gonna be straight up with you, and this might be like this, not disheartening, but one of those moments where you're like, oh shit, if you are the first to recognize that you're repeating actions that you don't want to go ahead and do because of generational trauma, it's not a bad thing to say you're not going to break the chain of the chain of generational trauma. You're not going to be the one that breaks it, but you are going to be the first one that puts a major chink in that chain. And your sons or your kids and your kids' kids, one of them should be able to go ahead and break it, because you are the first to acknowledge it, see it, and start taking work, not just for you, but for future generations. Not even if it's your sons, it can be your nieces, nephews, other people out there, guys. And that's why, like, if you guys are going through something, if you guys have gone through traumatic events, stressed out, anxious, depressed, dude, I will always recommend go to a therapist. If you're in university, college, check out and see if there are any resources there, because recognizing stuff like this is what helps us grow and become healthier adults. And what Paul is stating here is one of those cycles that we can fall into. And that's the thing, is we can't blame him for falling into a generational cycle. You can never blame someone for like falling into what is comfortable or projecting a lot of their insecurities in a way like this, right? And in Christianity and Judaism, they call it a family curse. Yeah. But what you can go ahead and do is you can go ahead and look at their actions and be like, wait a minute, we don't have control over the stuff that is taught, but we do have control over the actions that we take. And I think that's the big message from that. Anyway, and I was glad to hear it. No, if I'm being honest, I regretted it too. If I told Rudeus to get out and he really did leave, I'd surely regret that as well. I had to be patient. Hadn't I learned from the experience after all? Besides, on the day my child was born, I decided that I would never be a father like mine. Let's go, guy. Literally. I was not looking down, I promise, dude. I was not looking down. You're right. I had this wrong. I'm sorry. The apology came out naturally. Rudeus's expression softened, and he went on to explain what happened. He told me that he came across lost kids getting bullied and stepped in to help. Rather than punch anyone, he just tossed a ball of mud. It could hardly be called a proper fight. If what Rudeus said was true, then what he'd been done was a laudable thing, something he should be proud of. But instead of being praised for his actions, all he got was a father who wouldn't listen and struck him instead. When I was young, my father did the same thing to me so many times, never listening to my side of things and always blaming me for never being a perfect son. Oof, and this comes back around. Oof. Rudy, why weren't you Rudy, why weren't you paying attention to the boards? Rudy, you're the perfect son. You should be up and abroad and doing everything. You're not being a perfect son. Oof. Oof. Each time it happened, I felt so miserable and helpless. Oh, dude. And it's true, the shit like this happens. That's the thing. I think it's hitting me double. I think it hits me double seeing the anime and coming back and reading it, because it's like he recognizes that he doesn't want to be like that, but he's still falling into that cycle, that generational trauma cycle, dude. Those insecurities, that projection is coming out, dude. And it hits double. Like, I'm not kidding, dude. I'm reading this and I'm like, oh. Can you imagine, like, hold on, because now put yourself in Paul's perspective, right? Paul, like, without even going further, Paul is already feeling like this, right? Or Paul is like, you know, I don't want, like, my father would always blame me for not being the perfect son, not listening. We would always start fights. He would hit me, all of these things. And he's already like recognizing it here. And then he does it again. That's a big oofer, dude. That's a big oofer. That's a oof. Oof. But whatever lesson I'd been trying to teach here, I'd failed. But Rudeus didn't blame me for it. He even consoled me in the end. The cycle, dude. He was a good kid. Almost too good. What happens? Paul hits him, right? And Rudeus goes in for the hug and consoles him. That's a fucking oofer, dude. Because here's the thing. This is gonna be rough. People that have been through major sexual trauma or major traumas like that haven't healed through it. You know, like it's even like, it's not even like sexual traumas. It can be any form of trauma. If you've been through a major form of trauma and you've learned essentially learned helplessness, you will always try to appease the situation. Even if you don't want to appease it, even if you're like, I don't want to, I want to go ahead and do whatever, inside of you, you'll always try and be like, because losing that attachment is more pain, especially if you have attachment trauma. How many, like, I know a lot of people don't like to speak up about it. Yeah, it's like being a mediator, but just because you don't want to lose attachments, just because losing an attachment is another form of trauma. You already got hit. Okay, you can handle a punch, but here, come on. You know, it's okay. Our relationship can be saved. And this is why whenever I talk about boundaries, it's so important to go ahead and talk about it. And for me, what I'm saying is this, and this might be overshooting the fuck out of this. Rudy's attachments are one of his most important elements throughout this, like throughout what we're seeing so far. Rudy had the attachment of Eris, and you know, it's also related to not wanting to disappoint people, whether they're strangers or not. Yep, absolutely, cough me. And then that's how it manifests itself. But Rudy did not want to go ahead and, like, you know, like he had his attachments, his companions during this time. If his companions weren't there, do you think that he would try and fix this relationship sooner with his dad? If he was traveling alone, do you feel like the situation, like, yeah, they would have had their fight, but I think like they would have been probably attached at that point. It would have been one of those attachment things where it's like, you're the only person I know, so I have to attach myself to you type of thing, instead of him, you know, continuing on his journey, which of course makes sense that he'd have to continue his journey with Eris and whatnot. This is not me questioning that. What I'm talking about is like with his father, right? Say that they kept getting in fights and whatnot. I feel like Rudy would keep trying to appease the situation. Not just because it's his dad, but it's because it's already a learned response. You know, I don't want to lose the attachments that I have. And this is what's going to make it harder. You guys ready for this? You guys ready for my wild shot? Like, this is me throwing down the fucking gauntlet here. I think because of the like rupture and repair process that is attachments, what Eris does to Rudy is an extreme rupture. A lot of people, when they don't have that balance, right, they might go through sexual trauma. They might feel it as, like, you know, sexual trauma in some way, shape, or form. So, like, can present itself in physical forms, you know, not being able to perform, not being in the mood or wanting to be in the mood, with, like, sexually thirsting after people, but not being able to please them or please yourself or get off, stuff like that. Because, like, any form of trauma, relationship trauma, attachment trauma can present itself in physical ailments. But I can also see extreme attachments forming, which is, Masha Tank. Oh God, Masha Tank. Oh, you're like, you know, you're helping me. Oh, Masha Tank, we're gonna get married. Oh, bonfire. Oof, yo, I gotta bring you in now. Oh my God, bonfire. We all gonna be making babies now. Cough me. I can't lose any of you. I don't want to go through that process again. I haven't, you know, yeah, my physical ailments might heal, you know, hey, you know, my physical ailments, I might no longer, like, I might be able to perform now, you know, now that I have, like, you know, Masha Tank is here and he's, like, consoling me and being like, hey, it's gonna be okay. And I'm like, yes, it will be okay, you know? Cool, right? I might start feeling better, but all of a sudden, guess what? Because I was at this end of the pendulum and because I'm not actually working through my trauma, I'm going to start shifting all the way over here and now want all of these attachments, consciously or unconsciously, because over here, guess what? If I have all of these people, I have more people that don't want to leave me. I have more people that, like, you know, and stuff like that. And so the image of Roxy and the Holy Relic, yeah. But you see what I'm getting at, like, with that is, like, if you don't have the time to properly heal from a trauma like that, you might literally just start latching yourself onto, like, people of your past even more. And if you see them, mine, you know, that type of mentality, because you don't want to go through an attachment trauma. So that's my thing out there, is I feel like this is a way of, like, going through and finding out these cycles of violence. And anyway, let's go ahead and continue. Sorry, guys. My mind is literally fucking blowing 100%, dude. It literally went from pulse and story. In case you guys are wondering, how did it, like, it's a train that still connects to this. How did we get there? Paul's story off of generational trauma, Rudy's aspect in that generational trauma without his companions, how relationships affect, you know, physical ailments, how you can be on one side of the pendulum and swing all the way to the other. This is the way that a psychologist is constantly looking at you, and they're coming up with stuff in their heads and asking these questions. Okay, so you're telling me like, if Paul is telling me all of this, I'm wondering, like, okay, so have you had a conversation with your son about like setting up appropriate boundaries, or what your boundaries are? Because kids lead off of examples, and what does that mean for you? Anyway, for whatever reason, each time it happened, I felt so miserable and helpless. Well, whatever reason, whatever lesson I'd been trying to teach her, I'd failed. Ugh. But Rudeus didn't blame me for it. He'd even consoled me in the end, and he was a good kid. Almost too good. Was I even really his father? No. Zenith wasn't the type to have an affair, and besides, there was no father good enough to produce a child like him. Man, I never expected my seed would bear such strong fruit. More than pride, though, what I felt was an ache in my gut. Father, could I bring Sophie over to play sometimes? Of course. For now, I could at least be happy that my son had made his first friend. Bro. The fact. I know, his first friend. Oh, dude. Sophie needs to be protected. Sophie needs to be protected. I'm sorry, y'all. Sophie needs to. Oh God, you guys are now. You guys, I'm having an internal struggle here. Best girl, Sophie. I know, friend. But yeah, I mean, as a father, who would you protect, or not? Who would you protect? Would you be happy in a scenario like this? Sorry, my mind is like doing two things at once. Like, would you be happy in a scenario like this? Because for me, this feels like Paul's like, dude, like, fuck, the seed doesn't fall too far from the tree in this scenario. She does the protecting. Aw. My thing is, I'm glad that he could at least subside it. And, you know, during this period in time, even moments in introspection in the society of where they're at is huge. A lot of people, even myself included, I fell into this trap when I was doing episode 16 and 17. This is maybe just being straight up, which is thinking that people, like, for example, Paul and stuff, would be able to introspect in a moment like that. Granted, he did go through the cycle like that, but if we're looking at, like, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, he'd be struggling, dude. Like, straight up, he'd be struggling, and this is why relapse happens. And this is why even more, like, dude, if you're struggling, I'm gonna be straight up with you guys, and I hate to be honest about it. Dude, yeah, always go seek out help and whatnot. But, you know, make sure that your baseline needs are met, that you have a home. Yeah, that you have a home, that you have the base needs, right? Love, security, all of these things. We can, like, let me bring it up. I hate just speaking like without my, because people are like, oh, you're just making shit up, and it's like, no, dude, I'm a full-on psychologist. Let me bring up the actual theories, that way so you guys know. I always love bringing these up. For example, like, reflecting back on episode 16 and 17, I'm like, let's be honest here. Paul was fluctuating hard. If basic needs, one of the basic needs is home, yeah. Belonging is, he's struggling here. He's struggling here, man. He has people that work with him, yeah. You can say that they're relationships, but does he have a home? And so, like, and a big aspect of that is, like, yeah, he's supposed to be a parent, but he's not self-actualizing. He's having esteem need, like, needs, like, not necessarily being met. Belongingness and love needs not being met. You know, you have all of these things that are struggling here. And if a person doesn't have these strongly secured, i.e. in an environment where you can thrive in, or an environment where you're okay, guess what? It's going to be very hard for you to get all of the rest of these met. And that's why I'm, like, looking back at all of this and seeing the cycle that he's already, like, it's already there and that he's acknowledged. Think about it like this right now, and so I know I'm using it a lot, but, like, my brain is going 1,000 miles per hour right now in the environment where he is safe, where he has his basic needs met and his psychological needs met. He is able to self-actualize, i.e. introspect, and think, I don't want to be like my dad. I just did what my dad did. Now, going to episode 16 and 17, he can't do that. It's going to be a lot harder for him to be introspective like that because of this, because he's missing the top 3 layers here. That just blew my own mind. I'm sorry, guys. Sorry, like, you know, episode 16, 17, I guess I can go back and, like, reframe that, because straight up, he is missing these top 3 layers. Is it wrong to hit a kid? Absolutely. 110%. I'm sorry, Loki's gonna go wild for a second. Here's the cops. He likes to alert me whenever there's cops or the ambulance nearby. Sorry about that, guys, if you guys can hear it. But yeah, looking at the concept of this, I'm like, this is beautiful. Bark, 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 bark. Yeah, dude. He goes wild. He literally goes so fucking wild. He's like, it's a cop. Oh, Loki ain't no snitch. No, he ain't. No, he ain't. I have a big wolf dog, and yeah, best way for me to put it. But in situations like this, I'm like, this is a complicated. This is a complicated beauty of a story about relapse and change. Why it's okay to relapse and how that causes change. That is Mushoku Tensei. Mushoku Tensei is about how our failures in our life and the moments that we stop in our life and have complications can allow us to grow and change into a better individual or into a worse individual. That is a turning point. Mushoku Tensei goes far and beyond what a lot of normal isekai anime does, where they're just going to keep overpower scaling stuff and not really focusing on the needs. Because I'm looking at this, I'm like, the author did a beautiful job. Like, legit, the author, I can't even praise the author enough. I'm looking at this and I'm like, the author just completely fucking blew my mind at the moment. Might be the best isekai. Might be the best isekai. Also, Rick, thanks so much for stopping by. Yo, how you doing? But this might be the best isekai just because of the way that this was prepped. And I think I'm getting a special appreciation, a lot more of an appreciation of this because of going back, watching the anime, looking at it through that perspective, that first reaction perspective, right? And being like, oh, making your own assumptions about certain things, and coming back and reading the light novel and being like, wait a fucking minute. I wish they would have, like, wait a minute. Yeah, Mushoku Tensei is pretty good. It's pretty good, man. It's pretty good. And this is like, this made me take a step back and be like, oh, fuck. Like, I might have jumped a little too quickly there. That's fucking awesome, dude. That's, ooh. That is pretty fucking cool. I'm like a little kid. Sorry, guys. Like, let me let me just fucking like dwell in this for a second, because that hit me hard. Like, holy shit, dude. Oof. Oof. In case you guys are wondering, what are you talking about? This is what I'm talking about whenever I talk about, like, oh, projection, right? Or any of, like, these are defense mechanisms, right? Coping mechanisms that we use on our daily life. Whenever we encounter an issue or we're really, really anxious, we tend to use some of these, right? So whenever I talk about generational trauma, a big aspect of this that may pop up are any of these coping mechanisms. But fuck, dude. Fuck. What a beautiful little chapter here. All right, guys. I think that's going to bring us to the end of this little one. How many minutes was it, dude? How long did we go? What'd you guys take away from this one? After slapping Rudeus, Paul's POV. Because for me, like, this changes a lot. We haven't even gone down, dude. We haven't even gone down. Because we still need sending Rudeus to Ghislaine. Yeah. And we still have, like, Militian, Paul's story, what else do we have? We have quite a few other stories to go through. But if we're doing this chapter by chapter, what a fucking chapter to do. Like, I am, like, it's one of those moments of clarity and serendipity of, like, you know, me just feeling, like, legitimately elated. Like, I legit feel definitely generational trauma, despite being, Paul is a real one. Yeah, no, Paul is acting, yeah, Paul is acting in his time period the way a person would. Absolutely. Absolutely. I am blown away. I am legit, every single time that we do a dive into one of these, I'm repeatedly blown away. I'm repeatedly, like, taken back and made to, like, dude, breathe, think about it, put myself in a person's shoes and be like, ooh, wait a fucking minute. Like, this is pretty fucking good, dude. This is some pretty good fucking shit. And with that being said, did what we go over, you know, I guess this chapter that we went over, did it bring up anything in you? Were you able to see the characters or maybe a concept that you hadn't thought of before? Did you guys learn anything? My main thing, and I will always state this, is whenever we're doing any of this, it's mental health purposes. It's the main purpose of everything. But at the same time, it's to be able to question and learn and grow and find aspects to go ahead and relate to these characters and maybe even learn something about ourselves in a way. So I'm curious. I'm throwing that question out to you guys and to the YouTube individuals. I will say once again, guys, I appreciate you guys so much. Thank you guys from the bottom of my heart for introducing me to Mushoku Tensei and a lot of the anime that we've done. And if you guys are on Reddit, or if you also subscribe, guys, please, it helps a ton, especially as we will be doing Mushoku Tensei Season 2 the moment it comes out. We will probably be reading the novel. The more that I read Mushoku Tensei, the more that I'm like, dude, I want to get into it. The more I feel like I need to fucking start the novel. But yes, we tend to do this every Friday on Twitch, every Friday and Sunday on Twitch, so come and join us, dude. If you guys are able to vote for the chapters or volumes, it's randomly selected. That's the way that this works. We throw in a wheel, people choose what they want to throw up for a vote, people vote, and then we go off of that. But I will say this, guys, if you guys are kind enough, join our Discord, if you guys are on Reddit, I'm like, you know, my mods are on Reddit. I only have one account on Reddit, and that's like literally my Reddit account. But aside from that, join Six Faced World, join a lot of these wonderful creators and individuals that we have out here that are completely amazing, completely fucking amazing creators. I can't thank Sector, mi primo, mi hermano del otro mundo enough. Eidolon, Cough Me, Nickmare, Masha Tank, all of you guys for introducing me to like some 10 out of 10 content. For those of you guys here on Twitch, hey, if you want to continue on with the next chapter, you guys can vote on it. That's all I gotta say. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate you so much. Hit that like button, subscribe, let me know.